Hello, welcome to the Matchbox Mobile Bluetooth Developer Studio webinar. I'm Paul, I'm the test lead. Be here with Rick, who will be on the chat. Feel free to put any questions that you may have or comments into the chat, and we'll try and answer them when we get to the end of the demonstration. So, without much further ado, first of all, Bluetooth Developer Studio is a program which we've developed with Bluetooth in order to ease and improve delivery and manipulation of Bluetooth profiles. You can attain the application from the Bluetooth Developer Portal. Follow the link. You do have to be a member, but it's free to sign up, so you can sign up and then you can start using it for yourself. Once you've downloaded the application, it's a simple installation, and some new program files. We'll crack on and get it running. So, first thing I'm presented with in Bluetooth Developer Studio is this new project dashboard. This is where you can do sort of the basic functions. You can get the new and open projects. You can search for various things, which are we'll get to later. Some tutorial videos down here, but let's go a little bit further than I'm going to go in this instance, but just want to give you a quick run through of everything which is possible. First thing I'm going to do is sign in here. Say this is with a Bluetooth account, so you can get yourself one of them and you'll be able to do this. That gives you access to the community features, such as the downloading of packages which other people have made, which I'll explain about in a bit as well. So, signed in, I'm going to create myself a new project. Presented with a new project dialog. Today I'm going to be taking a basic example of a heart rate monitor. This is one of the Bluetooth adopted profiles. We'll make some modifications to it as we go along. So just put the name in. Here you can see the base UUID, 128-bit, and this is editable now at this stage in case you had any previous work which you wanted to align this project with. Namespace similarly, I'm going to go with VM.org. And that's, you can of course specify any location on the file system to save your project files. So click OK. Next screen you're presented with is the profile designer. This is where most of the tinkering, most of the fun, and all of the access to the information which is contained inside the Bluetooth profiles occurs. For people who are not necessarily too familiar with it, Bluetooth profile is a manner of describing the information which is transmitted from a Bluetooth peripheral so that it can be used in a client application. The entries you see on the right hand side here are adopted profiles. These are ones which have been specified by Bluetooth as standard profiles which allow anybody who uses that to interact with it in the same way. It's a pretty useful thing. So, we said we wanted to make a heart rate monitor, so I'll drag in the heart rate adopted profile. Now you'll notice here, the first thing you see is that the name of the project, the name of the profile, sorry, has gone over to heart rate. That's because I imported the whole thing, lock, stock, and two barrels. The profile header here, which has got some of the other information and a little bit of explanation about it. Again, all set by Bluetooth. And we have two services which are involved in this profile. The two services are the two services which would be running on a device which was using this profile. Here, if I drop down the heart rate, you can see that once again there's various amounts of information which is set by Bluetooth, and similarly device information. So I can edit all of these things. Subsequently, we have the heart rate, the characteristics. The characteristics are where the information which is actually transmitted, the data transmitted, is defined. And here we can see, going one step below, have the UUID of each one of these services, which is plugged into our base UUID. And we can go right down into the fields. The fields are the thing which specify how the data is structured in the bytes as it comes out. And below that, we have the bits, which is each individual bit, its size, what it means, and it allows you to specify and control the expectation of the data which is transmitted from your peripheral, sorry. So, say I make a change to something like this, which is an adopted service. If I go right ahead and change heart rate to heart rate monitor. I'll receive a prompt and ask me if I want to go custom local. Now this is the interesting thing about this. You can take adopted profiles, you can take adopted services and characteristics, and you can edit them, and you can change them for your own purposes, and then you can save them out as your custom local. And so if you go over to the services here, you can see that you've got a custom service in there. There we go. There he is. Custom heart rate monitor service. So any changes I made to that now will keep this up, and then that means I can reuse it. Should I want to add another one, I'm able to do that. So that's editing and taking adopted items. What about if I wanted to generate something entirely new? Can I add a custom service to this? So you notice here I've added this brand new service. It's popped up in here. What else would I like to do with my heart rate monitor? Well, I'd like to add a button to my heart rate monitor. So I'm going to call this one button service. I'll make sure that the UUID is set to 16-bit so that it uses the base UUID. And then I can add in a little bit of information and save that. Next, in order to define the data which the button service is going to be operating with, I need to add a custom characteristic. You can see here once again, I want to call it just simply button. And once again, change that to 16-bit UUID. And now, I want to set the property flag on this characteristic to mandatory. Next, in order to define the information which is actually contained within the characteristic transfer, I need to add a field. So I can add a field here, and it's a button state field, and as most people know, a button state field is most easily represented as a boolean. So now I've added that, I've set up my new service, I've got my button which is acting as a boolean, and I'd like to know just exactly how this thing's going to work. So this is another great thing about Bluetooth Developer Studio, is that you can pass over to the Workbench and we can emulate actual communications between a peripheral and a client. You see here on the left hand side you have the virtual server, which is acting as our peripheral, and on the right hand side the virtual client. Now I'm going to roll up these services so we can see what we're doing. Here's my button service. Currently the boolean's at 0, the button's not pressed. If I want to emulate that the button was pressed, I can add a 1 in here, and I can click the read button over here, and you can see that it's passed across. Now this doesn't look to be that powerful when you're just doing it manually on your own, but there is in fact a full JavaScript scripting engine built into this. I just so happen to have a couple of scripts which I'm going to add in here. Here's one for the peripheral. I can save that up, open up the scripting one, I can grab the one for the client and paste that in. Now what I've done with these scripts is I've actually got it to emulate the heart rate monitor reading the data from a real heart, and then doing a conversion on the client side to show it as a BPM. So if I just start that going, unfortunately that's not worked. I think I must have used the wrong version. Bear with me 1 second whilst I just grab the other versions. Just made a mistake with that 1 second. Just going to remove this service. I think it actually defined that. I'll grab this one in. And we'll give it another go. No, I think I have used the wrong version of those things. Bear with me 1 sec. So that's a bit of a disaster. I had actually sorted those out, but in the end I've deleted them and I don't have any working client scripts to show you. But if you can just imagine for a second that I could control programmatically this data here and control how it is read and manipulated by the client. So you can see exactly how your peripheral would behave. Now, having done that, the next most important thing that you would ever want to do with this is to generate some code so that you can use it in a client application. So as you can see here, I can go to the generate code function. I can pick down a client, and I can generate a client. Generate code for an iOS client here. Before I do that, I'll just show you that it's possible to check out on the Bluetooth.org website, developer portal, and search for Bluetooth Developer Studio plugins. You'll get this handy little list of plugins, including our one, which is available from our website, matchboxmobile.com, which will allow you to do the iOS client. So if I go and click generate on that, you can see that it's performed it. Now, this is a full JavaScript plugin engine and .liquid templating engine. So anything you can think of, you can probably do with this for any application. I'm going to open up the output location. Here you can say, not very interesting, but there it is, the characteristic helper. Try the Android client plugin. Again, open up the output location. Here you can see all the files that you need to do to just drop that straight into your Android project and get moving with it. Installing plugins is dead easy. Simply go to the installation directory. There's a plugin directory. Open up one of the plugins. You see the most important file. It's just plugin.js. Here you can see it's just a JavaScript. Anything you can think of you can write in JavaScript you can do with the output from these plugins. Finally, you've exported your code, you've tested your device, you want to save this and share it with people in your organization. You can save it as a Bluetooth Developer Studio project in your documents. Here's my heart rate monitor. Here's all of my things, characteristics available there to share with anybody or plug into your tool chain. And finally, if you just want the files, you can output the files to a location of your own choosing. And there we have it. I'm going to pass you over to Rick now. You can ask some questions, and perhaps Rick will be able to get the scripts working on the Workbench.
Good afternoon, this is Rick speaking. If you have any questions, if you could just pop them into the chat window, we'll attempt to answer them. Michael Cole's just asked a question. Is Workbench scripting the same as writing plugins, or are the scripts totally different? The short answer to that is they are two totally different scripts. You can't use a Workbench script inside of plugins. However, they are both using the JavaScript engine, so they're both written in JavaScript. But yeah, the plugin engine gets past a model of data which represents the profile which was shown in the designer, whereas the Workbench gets the similar sort of data, but it can also communicate with the client side or the server side depending on which context you're running in. It's also worth noting that both models for both plugin and Workbench are both documented in a help file which comes as part of the installer. Michael asked another question. Do I have to write JavaScript just to output code via a plugin? The answer is yes. Within the app there is no way to output any data at all without writing some JavaScript for a plugin. However, if you're feeling adventurous, you can parse the files that the project's created and produce the output using any language you like. The benefit of using the JavaScript engine we've got, we create a model which is easy to iterate over and observe, so that you can write files out. Another question, do you test it with some Nordic semiconductor device? Now, recently there's been a plugin written by Nordic. However, we have to bear in mind that BDS doesn't run any code on a device, so Bluetooth Developer Studio is not running any code on the device. However, we can communicate with Nordic devices by connecting to a physical device and having a client script communicate with it, or just by driving the Workbench UI. But if you go to the Bluetooth website and the plugins, you'll find the Nordic plugin there. Georgia asks, how do you share what you've made? The short answer to that is through publishing. Once you've prepared your package, once you've prepared your profile, you then enter the metadata for a package, which you should be able to see on screen now. And once you've entered all your package information and you publish, that will then be accessible by anybody else using the application, and they can cherry pick parts out of your package. So for example, if you created a very clever characteristic that could be reused somewhere else, this can also be used in another project. Or if somebody as an extreme example, if Nike decided to create a new watch and it hadn't been released yet and they created a package for people to start writing applications for, this would be an ideal candidate for that. Michael asks, can I run my peripheral on my iPad acting as a device instead of using a Workbench script? Yes, if you use an application such as Light Blue, you can configure your iPad to behave like a heart rate or a health thermometer, and then yes, you can connect to that using the Workbench and write scripts to communicate with it. What are the C1, C2, C3 options? This is part of the Bluetooth specification, which is very large and complicated. So there is some level of assumption that you are aware of parts of the Bluetooth specification on how a Bluetooth profile is constructed to be able to actually get it on a device. Without some little knowledge, you may struggle to understand what some of these things are. But just going back to your question directly, C1, C2, C3, they are all references to constraints, which you may set on a characteristic. So you may set on a characteristic, this property has a constraint of C1, and that C1 is set by something else, maybe a field within another characteristic. The Bluetooth Developer Studio is purely a file manipulator, so there's no logic around what happens when C1's set. That's all down to the scripts and the implementation that you deploy to the device. If I drag back into the repository, will it just upload? No, that would be nice, but no, you have to go through a process of making sure that you've set all your metadata correctly before you can publish. If you drag an item to the right hand side, what we call the repository browser, that is the same as just removing that entry from your profile. Michael asks, will it upload the custom bits I have edited or all of it? So I'm assuming you mean when you go through the publishing wizard. So what happens is when you publish something, only the new parts get published into the repository. So if you're using an adopted item, it knows that that data already exists in the server and it will share it. So we don't end up with duplicates of services and characteristics. If you make a modification to something you've already published, this will do an update and leaving the old version behind, meaning that if somebody's already using that version prior to you doing the update, they will still continue to use that version. Anybody else pulling the items that you've published will always get the latest. I hope that answers your question. my class what is the custom properties button. This allows you to set a key and value pair value, or a set of values for any element within the profile, and this can include the profile, the service, the characteristic, or the descriptor. Now, it's probably worth mentioning that my speech is out of sync with what you can see on screen, but I am just opening up the custom properties here, and I could set test value and give it a value of 1, 2, 3, 4, and then while that has no effect on the actual profile that is saved, you can read that from the scripting environment, and that includes from plugins or from the Workbench. Can we tell you something about descriptors? Again, this is part of the Bluetooth specification, so there is some assumption that you understand how to use descriptors, but a good example of a descriptor is a, let me just see if I can remember the name of it, bear with me 1 second. I think it's a characteristic presentation format, which is used for things like the heart rate monitor. And what a descriptor actually is it modifies how a value of a characteristic is represented without actually modifying the characteristic. So, for example, in heart rate, this is useful because I don't want to modify my heart rate characteristic, but I do want to be able to give it some extra attributes to say whether notifications have been enabled or not. So by default, when a heart rate switch is on, it will not send out any traffic to the clients until the client specifically says, I want to hear every time something changes. And that message is changing the descriptor value, not the characteristic. Is it mandatory? The only time it's mandatory is on a notification or an indicate. So the best example of this, again, is a heart rate monitor or the health thermometer. If you look at those two services and have a look at the characteristics on those, you'll see descriptors already exist, and that's the best example of where it is mandatory, because any client that expects a heart rate or a health thermometer is expecting to be able to set that descriptor value to be able to turn on notifications. I'm just going to paste a link in which may be useful for you and has been invaluable to us throughout the development of this project, where you can see not only all the services, characteristics and descriptors that exist as part of the adoption set that Bluetooth have created. You can actually drill down and have a look at how that's constructed. And if you take a level up from the page that I linked, there's more information about what a descriptor is, what a service is, what a characteristic is. And hopefully that's helpful. We're coming to the end of the time now. If there's any more questions you'd like to ask us, you can either tweet us at Matchbox Mobile or drop us an email at info@matchboxmobile.com. That's a good question. I'll answer this final question. How will this tool help with certification? So, as it stands with version 1, it is not part of the certification process within Bluetooth. However, the long-term goal of this is that it will become part of the certification. Now, that's not to say that it doesn't help, because what this tool does is it will create well-structured XML files, and they will always match the specification that Bluetooth have specified. So you are far more likely to get this through certification than you are if you were to construct the XML files yourself. But in terms of getting a tool through certification, currently this tool, Bluetooth Developer Studio, doesn't really help with that because it's not integrated into the existing process. But sure, producing the XML files and producing the profile will absolutely give you a leg up on going through that process. We'd like to thank you for joining us on this Bluetooth Developer Studio webinar. Just to repeat, if you want to get in touch, you can tweet us at Matchbox Mobile, you can email us at info@matchboxmobile.com, or you can just put your questions and comments in the comments section of YouTube, and if there's contact details in there, we will try our best to get back to you. Thank you again. Have a good day.